Some of Gooseworx's recent Tumblr answers gave us a bit more insight into the new character and what might have actually happened between Jax and Ribbit in the past. We know that Ribbit abstracted before Kaufmo, and since Kaufmo's abstraction happened in the pilot episode, while every new episode basically reflects the next day, there's a chance Ribbit's abstraction happened not too long ago, which could explain why Jax still reacts to all of this so emotionally. Goose revealed to us that Ribbit was a girl, and while I noticed in the comments under the previous video that some fans had already suspected this before the official reveal, those were just guesses. Most people still thought of Ribbit as a guy. But as soon as Goose told us the truth, theories started flooding in that Jax might have actually been in love with her, and that's why he misses her so much and seems so sad. The saddest part is that it's not just fans doing this. Some big channels are also pushing that theory, almost like they're ignoring the fact that at the very start of the amazing digital circus, Goose directly stated there would be no romantic relationships in the show. Any theories, teasers, or so-called leaks that even hints at romance isn't canon and is just another fake. Let's make it clear right away. Jax and Ribbit really were best friends. They genuinely had a warm and close bond, but it never went beyond friendship. I get why a lot of people want to believe there's some kind of love story in the amazing digital circus, because that sort of thing is always intriguing, but that's not what this show is about. You shouldn't expect anything like that here, and any so-called leak claiming otherwise is definitely fake. We know for sure that episode 7 will be a so-called flashback episode, and that means we'll finally learn the truth and put an end to all those romance theories in the amazing digital circus once and for all. But beyond that, it's important to understand why Ribbit became such a close friend to Jax, someone who usually seems distant and kinda harsh. Ribbit ended up in the digital circus quite a while ago, supposedly long before Pomni showed up. And what's even more interesting is that she was there before Kaufmo, Gangle, and Zubul. There's actually a theory based on the layout of the characters' rooms that supposedly helps determine who entered the circus first, but that's a topic for another time. Most likely Jax was always a pretty mischievous guy, and it's important not to confuse that with rudeness, because he actually became rude only after losing Ribbit. Ribbit herself was probably pretty easygoing too. In that case, they seemed like the perfect pair of friends, and nothing should have really led to Ribbit abstracting. But there's one detail that changes everything, and today we're going to talk about what really happened between Jax and Ribbit. Now, if we look at his reaction to Ribbit's room, what immediately stands out is the complete despair and confusion on Jax's face. As we remember from the pilot episode, the hallway is full of rooms belonging to characters who haven't lived in the digital circus tent for a long time, and we never saw that kind of reaction from Jax to them. Sure, you could say maybe he just didn't notice them, but first off, they're literally all over the hallway, and second, the creators of the show put the spotlight specifically on those two. As a result, I can draw a certain conclusion. Jax's different reactions reflect his mental state, and especially considering that Ribbit and Kaufmo's abstractions happened one after the other, we can draw a parallel that the digital circus system, with every new loss, stirs up more and more emotions in Jax, and, as a result, worsens his condition. First, it's confusion about why it's happening, then anger at everything going on, and after that, there's only madness left, leading straight to his transformation into an abstracted monster. Our problem is that most of the time we see Jax after all the events have already happened, but there was a short period when Jax didn't yet know about Kaufmo's so-called death and was still that same fun guy he always describes himself as.
As time goes on, we just end up falling into our archetypes, become part of the machine.
What's your archetype then? The villain?
Listen, I add a key dynamic.
In that case, we realize that Jax was already like this even before Pomni showed up, and I'm sure his so-called archetype fully formed right after the terrible events that happened with Ribbit, and all of this is directly tied to what we see in one of the final scenes of episode 6. And now that we understand the connection between Jax's mental state and his outlook on life in the digital circus, with the deaths of characters who were close to him, we can move on to the next part of the video where you'll find out what happened to Ribbit, why Jax is directly guilty of it, and how it's going to affect him in the upcoming episodes. First off, it's important to point out that Jax was already in the digital circus before Ribbit showed up, and most likely had witnessed other characters being abstracted. Because of that, he developed his defense mechanism that we see in literally every episode. What Ribbit was like back then, we don't know, but judging by Pomni, we can assume he was a pretty good character, and that's where things get really interesting. Let's start by remembering that short dialogue scene between Ragatha and Jax.
Howdy, howdy.
I know exactly what you're doing with Pomni, and it'll never work.
Huh?
You know, getting close with Pomni to corrupt her. Wait, no, wait! Oh, wow, I didn't actually think that'd work.
Before we go back to that scene, I want to remind you that Jax's final worldview, so to speak, was shaped after Ribbit's abstraction, though it was already similar even before he showed up. In this scene, Regatha makes it very clear that she knows what's going to happen to Pomni if she keeps hanging around Jax. And that's the first thing we should pay attention to, because right after those words we saw pure animal rage from Jax. I already told you this is insanely weird, and the only other time we saw that exact expression on his face was in that very scene from episode 5 where Regatha mentioned Ribbit. So we understand that Jax fully realized why Regatha said that, and if we see emotions like that, it means this guy definitely has something to hide, and he's fully aware that in his best friend's death, there's absolutely some guilt on his part. I assume Ribbit was originally a kind character, and at the moment when he was, so to speak, a newbie in the digital circus, it's pretty likely that Jax had similar talks with him to the one we saw in the dorm hallway.
You know none of this is real, right?
Oh, what do you mean? Like the circus?
The game today is literally to shoot each other. So what's the point in taking this moral high ground?
Well, they're my friends. I don't really want to hurt them.
All right, let me be real here.
Now let's remember what Jax said about archetypes, and it's pretty likely that after talking with him, Ribbit came up with a role for himself and played it. But the whole problem is that character behavior isn't really about archetypes, it's more about their conscious behavior that was carried over from the real world, and based on that, their characters were created. The clearest example is Gangle, who most likely suffered from bipolar disorder, and that's exactly why she has multiple masks that change her mood. If we look at the fun-loving Jax, who's playing the role of the cheerful guy, because if we remember that very scene, it becomes obvious that Jax is pretending most of the time, and right here we see the consequences of those actions.
God, you look stupid.
What if after all those talks with Jax, Ribbit also started wearing a mask that went against his true self and over time began to notice that it was slowly destroying him, eventually leading to irreversible consequences? It's pretty likely that the same thing happened with Kaufmo, because from Regatha's words we know Kaufmo was a fun guy, so why did he just straight up lose it? Maybe that's exactly why Jax is so scared of making friends with anyone. He fully understands that he's the reason characters get abstracted, and feeling that guilt, he slowly starts losing it himself. So, one of the most dramatic and, at first glance, disgusting scenes in the entire history of the digital circus is actually the real saving of one character's life. As always, I'm waiting for your thoughts in the comments, and see you soon in the next videos.